For over 300,000 years, they were the undisputed masters of Ice Age Europe and Asia. They survived plunging temperatures, hunted woolly mammoths, and adapted to some of the harshest environments our planet has ever seen. But then, around 40,000 years ago, the Neanderthals vanished. For decades, the popular story we told ourselves went something like this. Homo sapiens, our direct ancestors, migrated out of Africa, marched into Europe, and through superior intelligence, better weapons, or sheer violence, drove the Neanderthals to extinction. We were the conquerors, they were the vanquished. But what if that story is entirely wrong? What if the Neanderthals weren't wiped out by a prehistoric war? What if by the time our ancestors even arrived in Europe, the Neanderthals were already walking ghosts? Today, the groundbreaking science of ancient DNA is completely rewriting human evolution. Thanks to recent genetic discoveries, some of which recently won the Nobel Prize, we now know the tragic, hidden truth about the fall of our closest evolutionary cousins. The secret to their extinction wasn't in their weapons, it was hiding in their blood. The illusion of the Neanderthal Empire. To understand why the Neanderthals went extinct, we first have to look at how they lived. If you were to look at a map of the Neanderthal world roughly 100,000 years ago, it looks like a massive empire. Their territory stretched from the Atlantic coast of Spain, across the snow-covered plains of Central Europe, all the way into the Altai Mountains of Siberia. But this vast geographic range is an illusion. While their territory was gigantic, their actual population size was shockingly small. Paleogeneticists use a metric called effective population size to measure the genetic health and breeding potential of a species. For modern humans living today, our numbers are in the billions. For the ancestors of modern humans living in Africa back then, the effective population size was comfortably in the tens of thousands. But for Neanderthals? Across the entire continent of Europe and Asia, their effective population size may have been as low as 3,000 to 10,000 individuals total. Imagine the entire population of a small modern town spread out over 2 continents. Because of the brutal Ice Age climate, the landscape simply couldn't support large numbers of people. As a result, Neanderthals lived in incredibly isolated, highly fragmented groups. And in the world of biology, isolation is the first step toward extinction. The secrets hidden in the bone. For a long time, the low population of Neanderthals was just an educated guess based on archaeological digs. But in the 21st century, the field of paleogenetics, spearheaded by Nobel laureate Svante Pääbo, unlocked the ultimate time machine: ancient DNA. Scientists realized that if you drill into a specific dense bone in the skull called the petrous bone, or extract material from ancient teeth, you can sequence the complete genome of a prehistoric human. The smoking gun for the Neanderthals' doom was found in Siberia. In 2022, a landmark study published in the journal Nature detailed the genetic sequencing of 13 Neanderthals found in 2 Russian caves, Chagirskaya and Okladnikov. These individuals lived roughly 54,000 years ago. What the scientists found when they looked at the DNA of these 13 individuals was absolutely staggering. First, they realized that several of these Neanderthals were directly related. They found a father and his teenage daughter. They found a young boy and an adult female who was a second-degree relative, perhaps his aunt or his grandmother. This was the first time scientists had ever found a true Neanderthal family living and dying together. But the beautiful discovery came with a dark genetic twist. The genetic diversity among these 13 individuals was incredibly low. In fact, it was lower than any previously recorded human population. It closely resembled the genetic diversity seen today in endangered species that are on the very brink of extinction, like the mountain gorilla. The DNA revealed that these Neanderthals were heavily inbred. Because their populations were so small and separated by hundreds of miles of impassable frozen terrain, they didn't have the option to meet other groups. They were forced to mate within their own tiny communities, generation after generation. The fragile genome, mutational meltdown. Why does inbreeding matter so much? Because of a biological phenomenon known as mutational meltdown. In a large, healthy population, natural selection works efficiently. If a harmful genetic mutation pops up, it usually gets weeded out over a few generations. But in a tiny, inbred population, natural selection starts to break down. Harmful mutations don't disappear. They stick around, and they compound. Ancient DNA shows us exactly what this did to the Neanderthals. Over thousands of years, their genomes accumulated a heavy load of deleterious mutations, essentially genetic errors that made them physically weaker. Their fertility rates likely dropped, infant mortality likely skyrocketed, and crucially, their immune systems lost the genetic variety needed to fight off new, emerging diseases. This genetic fragility couldn't have come at a worse time. During the late Pleistocene, the Earth's climate was violently unstable. Temperatures would wildly fluctuate from freezing cold to relatively warm in a matter of decades. Forests would turn into frozen steppes, and the large game that Neanderthals relied on for survival would migrate or die off. To survive extreme climate change, a species needs genetic flexibility. But the Neanderthals had lost theirs. Their DNA tells the story of a species that was trapped in a biological dead end, slowly suffocating under the weight of its own genetic isolation. The final blow. Along came Homo sapiens. So, if Neanderthals were already fading, what role did we play? Around 45,000 years ago, anatomically modern humans, Homo sapiens, began pushing into Europe. We didn't encounter a thriving, massive Neanderthal civilization. We encountered scattered, highly vulnerable ghost populations that were already teetering on the edge. Did we fight them? Probably, in some cases. But the ancient DNA reveals a much more complex story. We didn't just compete with them for hunting grounds, we mated with them. Genetic evidence shows that early Homo sapiens and Neanderthals interbred on multiple occasions. In fact, if you are of non-African descent, you currently carry about 1 to 2% Neanderthal DNA in your own genome. But because our population numbers were exponentially larger, we didn't just merge equally. We genetically swamped them. Imagine pouring a cup of dark coffee into a swimming pool. The coffee doesn't destroy the water. It just gets completely diluted until you can't see it anymore. Homo sapiens had vast, interconnected social networks. When times got tough, we could trade with neighboring tribes, share resources, and bring in new genetics. Neanderthals, trapped in their isolated pockets, couldn't. We absorbed the last few remaining healthy Neanderthals into our massive genetic pool, while the rest of their isolated, inbred communities simply succumbed to the cold, starvation, and disease. The ghosts in our DNA. The extinction of the Neanderthals wasn't a singular, violent event. It was a slow, tragic fade to black that took thousands of years. They were incredible survivors. They possessed large brains, complex tools, and a deep understanding of their environment. But ancient DNA has shown us that the dice were genetically loaded against them. Isolated by geography and battered by a shifting climate, their low population numbers sealed their fate long before the first Homo sapiens ever set foot in Europe. But in a way, they never completely went extinct. Because they mated with our ancestors, pieces of their DNA survived the Ice Age. Their genetic legacy lives on today, in our immune systems, in our hair, and in the very blueprint of humanity. Thanks so much for watching. If you want to learn more about the incredible secrets hidden in ancient DNA, make sure to hit that subscribe button and click the bell icon so you don't miss our next video. Have a thought on the Neanderthals? Let me know in the comments down below. Do you think humanity today could ever face a similar genetic bottleneck? Until next time, keep digging into the past.